Hello, welcome to Success Tips. This is where we come on every other week and we give you some kind of success tip to get you through the week or through the month. Something that you can be processing and working on to really have success, because that's what we want. We want you to have success. That's why we're here at Destiny Global. We have trainers who are here to help you have success using skills and tools and processes to get you where you want to go, the life that you want. And we want you to have that life. So today we're talking about some myths. 3 myths about processing loss. And why am I talking about this? First of all, we have a lot of people in our community that have gone through significant loss in the last year or a couple of years. And watching them process, we have learned that there are so many myths out there. And we want to really set the record straight for the truths about loss. Now, why am I talking about this? Actually, I am Dr. April Brown. I am Executive Vice President of Coaching here at Destiny Global. But for 21 years, I was a licensed professional counselor. And I worked with a lot of grief. I ran some grief groups. I have helped people to process grief. And I also do coaching. And I have done, even through this time of helping some people process through some really significant grief. And so I'm going to walk through some of the myths that we all see, and we all might even think these myths. I think every one of us thinks at least one of these myths is true, but they're not. And even in the whole world of psychology and psychiatry and all of that and counseling, sometimes they can get this wrong. And so I really want to share these 3 myths with you to really what is grief and what is loss? Because many times people only think of grief and loss as losing a loved one through death. But we can also grieve loss in many other ways. We can grieve a loss of a job. We can, especially if it's a career. If there is like something that is our identity and we have identified as that and we've been working in that environment for a very long time, helped other people succeed in that and had success in that, felt like we were going to retire in that position, and then we have that loss, because what happens is that it's a loss of our expectation of that dream, but also a loss of identity. We can have a loss of identity. Who am I now without this job? Divorce is a loss. It might not be a loss in that physical person no longer being on this earth, but it could be that loss of the hope of relationship and a future that you thought you would have growing old with somebody in particular. And all of your heart's desire was for that relationship, yet that relationship didn't work out. That is grief. That is loss. We can have multiple other, just in general, someone moving away and having a loss of that relationship. It creates this feeling inside of us of not having the hope that we once had for the future. And that is technically what loss and grief is. When we have an expectation of what our future is going to look like, and something disrupts that, and we have a belief and a vision for what our future will look like, and then something completely different happens, and it's attached in any way to our identity, or something that is routine in our life, that we have an expectation of always being there. that creates a loss and a hole in our heart and in our life. So there are three different myths about loss. The first one is that time heals all wounds. Anybody ever heard that? Or that time heals? That's a myth. Time doesn't heal all wounds. And let me explain that. Because yes, over time, the pain might not feel as significant, but the loss is still there. The grief is still there. So time does not in and of itself heal all wounds. It's actually what you do during that time, how you intentionally process during that time, what you were doing to really make a process for yourself, to process your thoughts, your feelings, your beliefs about that in a very healing way. So it's not time in of itself. It's actually intentionally processing the grief, the loss, the feelings, the hopes that are now gone, the ideas that you had of what that future looked like with that person, or with that job, or if you move and you plan to live in this home and in this environment, in this community for the rest of your life. I actually, in the beginning of kind of my marriage, this whole church split apart and divided, and some went to another church and some stayed there, and we felt so divided and we didn't know what to do. And for the longest time, we really worked on staying and working at this church and making this church become what it should be, of unity and unity around a singular purpose of what the church was for. And we really worked on that. But there came a time where we were actually didn't even have the ability or the respect of the people because of the changes that we were trying to make, or they felt like we were trying to make changes that weren't right. So we actually, and not really even changing, it's really just bringing it to unity through prayer, through the Bible, through truth. And we began to see that there was hostility towards us, and there wasn't any capacity for us to move forward with the church. We did everything. We prayed because we so loved the pastor, the ministers of the church, the congregation of the church, but we also were so grieved of the people that left because we were so close to them. So it was a loss. It was literally, as young married couple, it was a true loss of community for us. And I would just have these feelings randomly of just crying, just so sad of what was happening. And as we left that church, continued to feel even more of grief and loss of ideas of community. I thought we would have kids here and raise our kids there, and we would all be so close, as there was such closeness in the community. And it just was such a loss for me. And sometimes I would think, this is stupid. I'm not supposed to be grieving, or this isn't supposed to be loss. It's a church. I didn't think, I only thought in terms of loss being the loss of a person through death. And I did not realize just how I needed to process those feelings. And I began to learn how to work through those feelings and to process them and recognize them when I was feeling them and what it was, and just let them come and just feel them and just recognize what it was, and that this is loss. This is what loss feels like. This is what something that I pictured and a belief about my life and my future and now not having that, and now having to have a different vision and figure that vision out and what that looked like. And that is what loss looks like. The feelings just come when they come. And you can't say, well, it's been a year or it's been 2 years. I'm going on this year, or no, next year will be 30 years since my mom passed away. And there's not a moment that I still don't occasionally have, like, I always think about her. I think about her quite often, but I'll just be feeling something on a certain day, and I'm like, what is going on with me? And I'll just feel emotional, and I'm like, it's not this, not that. Like, I'll just go through all the things, and then I'll actually realize that on the calendar it's either my mom's birthday or the day that she passed away or the day that we had her funeral service. And our bodies actually know these things. It's like we have it's written in our, have you ever, maybe you've heard of that book about our body keeps the score. Well, our bodies are actually just like when you learn to ride a bike, and the first time you're actually having to be so intentional with it and think through how to steer and keep balance and how to pedal all at the same time. And then all of a sudden it becomes muscle memory. And usually it's after sleep. Like the first time you're just like, I can't do all this all at one time. And then you go to sleep, and the next morning you wake up and you go try it again, and you're a little better. You can steer maybe a little better, or you can pedal while having balance. So those things are muscle memory. Your muscles begin to have memory of how to do that thing. And then soon you can ride a bike and you never have to think about it. Well, our bodies actually have those memories stored with emotion. Usually when we have a very emotional thing, have you ever remembered something on a day that a president died, or maybe even 9/11, and you have this emotional response the day of, and you remember exactly where you were. You remember exactly the feelings that you had when you heard about that or when you saw that. And those memories pop up, and all of the feelings of that day pop up. And you may not even, and there may be times you're not even aware of it, then you remember what that day, the significance that the day holds. That's what that is like. And you have to just process it. And over time, if you process it in the right way, your body will begin to learn a new way to deal with it. That you won't have such reactions if you're processing through it to create a new process, your body responding in a different way. So time does not heal all wounds just with time itself. It is intentional processing in a way that brings healthy healing, that you know that your body is not responding with the grief responses the same that it did, because you're processing it, you're dealing with it. Doesn't mean you're not going to have days that you feel sad, but you're not going to have the same emotional reactions. It's not going to be as strong and as intense as you begin to process it. So that is what the truth is. It's not time heals all wounds, but intentional processing of grief and loss brings you to a point where you don't have as much of a response. You'll still have the memory, you'll still have the feelings, but they won't be as intense. So the second one is that people say it's just time to move on, right? What does that mean when you move on? When you have a loss, it's actually telling you that you loved deeply. And you'll never not love that person, so how are you going to move on? It's not like a divorce. Like, it's like you are still attached to that person. You're still attached to the memories that go with that person. And that person, for me as a believer, I know that person is still alive. It still has all of the who they are and the characteristic and the person that they are. So it's not moving on. It's actually learning to deal with the loss in a different way. It's learning that you don't have to, because many people think to love somebody else, or maybe if it was a spouse and you move on, that you can marry again. But no, I've seen many people successfully do it, and it's not to move on. It's actually to know that you can hold space for that person and the love you had for them, but also have love for this other person that you invite into your life, and that person accepts that. That's what the healthy thing is to do. Not moving on, not forgetting about that person, but how to process in a way and remember that person without it becoming a all sorrow and all hurt and pain, but it's actually where you can feel some of the hurt but joy at the same time. You can remember the memories, and you can feel so joyful and happy that you had those memories with that person, and they don't just create so much pain. And then you know that you're ready to invite maybe somebody else in to expand your love, not move on, but expand. That you can have these memories with this person, and you can now make new memories with the person that you now love, who is in your life now. So, not moving on, but moving through that grief and that loss. The third one is, it's like a fortune cookie. So I wrote them down on little tags here. So here's the third one and the final one. Everyone processes the same. So the way I process is the way you need to process, because I'm processing the right way. And you need to learn how to process how I learn. And then we judge one another of how each other processes. And this is really tough in a family. When you have a family that's all going through grief, and one is processing one way and one is processing another way, and you can't understand why that person is processing that way and you're processing another way. So let's say something is sentimental to you about that person, but it's reminding that other person of bad memories. So you have the split. You go in the room, you have the clothes. One wants to get rid of them, one wants to keep them and keep them for an inordinate amount of time. There's no date of when you might process through that and get rid of the things in the room. So one is ready to it's too painful for them. They want to keep the stuff. The other one, they want to get rid of the stuff. The other one is too painful to get rid of the stuff. They want to keep it. They want to have that memory. They want to go in there and smell that person. They want to feel close to them. So those two different ways of grieving, and one is going to judge the other. And one is going to feel disrespected and unloved by the way the other person is processing their grief. So it really is a lot based on personality. One is very sentimental, and those things hold a lot of sentiment. And one might be that it's not sentimental, and it just reminds them of that person. They feel like they just always have to go in and process and process and process and cry and all the things that happen every time they see that. So what needs to happen is just an understanding. This understanding, this person is grieving in their way and you're grieving in your way, and come together. Maybe set a date. Hey, could we look to this date to possibly get rid of some of the stuff? And we can have a box that you can keep. And the things that are really, really special that hold a lot of sentiment during that time, when you come in and you have a feeling during that period of time that you connect with that person, it really makes you feel connected, then we can put a box or we can put that somewhere where you can go, or maybe I don't see it all the time. So it's really understanding each other, processing together, understanding that someone else processing their way does not make it wrong. It just makes how they process, how they're working through their grief. And so it takes a lot of grace. It takes a lot of understanding loss for where you are and where that person is. Give yourself grace and give that other person grace. We all need grace when we're going through any kind of loss. And sometimes you can just say, listen, I know that I have, like, this happened a year ago, but I'm still processing some things. You can't just check out completely, but there are times that, like, hey, I'm going to need some time to actually take a few days off just to process as the date comes up, or on that anniversary. And just telling your boss or people around you that maybe that you might need a little extra grace because that is coming up, and making them aware instead of afterward and you're having all the emotions and they're not understanding. So it's really communicating. And I hope that these 3 myths have really helped you to process what it means and what it doesn't mean. That we can have these beliefs, but until we really sit to understand, are those myths or are those truths? And what do those truths really look like, and how can we process in a really healthy way? That we can work through and process this grief so that we are healthy and still attached to that person in a healthy way, but moving forward, not moving on, but moving forward, dealing with the emotions intentionally. I hope that this has helped you. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Success Tips. Join us again in 2 weeks where we will have another trainer training you on a success tip. Thanks for joining. See you later.